The ballroom fell silent when Luca Moretti ripped off his midnight black jacket and threw it at Elena Russo's feet in front of 200 guests. The cold Mafia boss accused the full-figured Tailor of weakening the suit, so an assassin-s bullet could reach his heart. His guards sealed the doors, and Luca gave Elena until midnight to prove she had not betrayed him. But when she opened the torn lining, she found a second bullet hole carefully stitched shut before the suit ever entered her shop. That should have been impossible. Luca's men claimed the jacket had remained locked inside his private dressing room for 6 years. Worse, the hidden damage matched the night. Luca's older brother vanished, a night his family had forbidden anyone to discuss. Elena had only 3 hours before the Mafia Council sentenced her. Yet exposing the truth could reveal why Luca had unknowingly worn evidence of his own family's darkest crime. Rain rattled against the tall windows of the Moretti Grand Hotel as Elena knelt on the ballroom floor beside Luca's jacket. The emerald wrap dress she had chosen for the gala pulled across her broad hips when she shifted, but she ignored the discomfort and the 200 pairs of eyes fixed on her. She had spent her life repairing what other people tore. She knew the difference between damage caused by strain. A blade and a bullet, the seam above Luca's heart had not failed. Someone had cut 3 load-bearing stitches and rubbed the silk until it looked worn. "You altered it yesterday," Luca said. At 34, Luca Moretti had the authority to empty a room with one word. He stood in his open-collar white shirt, broad shoulders rigid, black and gray tattoos climbing his neck and covering his hands. His expression remained cold, but Elena saw the pulse beating hard beneath the ink. She had once known every way he concealed fear. "I shortened the sleeves and reset the collar," she replied. "I never opened the chest canvas." Vittorio Moretti, Luca's uncle and consigliere, stepped from the council table. The assassin fired exactly where the fabric had been weakened. That is not poor workmanship. It is guidance. The shot had come from the musician's balcony 9 minutes earlier. Luca's armored undershirt had stopped it, leaving a dark bruise beneath his ribs. But the shooter had escaped through a service corridor. Vittorio wanted a culprit before the guests were released, and Elena was standing beside the most convenient evidence in the room. Luca's gaze dropped to her hands. "Show me what you found." Elena turned the jacket inside out. Under the torn lining, a crescent of old, brown-stained canvas surrounded a narrow puncture. Tiny stitches crossed it in 2 uneven rows. The repair had been made from the inside and concealed beneath a replacement panel. "This is at least 5 years old," she said. "The silk has oxidized." And this, she touched the doubled knot. "With 1 fingernail was my father's finish." He doubled back on the final stitch because arthritis made his right hand shake. Samuel Russo had died 2 years earlier without ever speaking Marco Moretti's name. Luca's older brother had disappeared 6 years ago after being accused of stealing money from the East Pier accounts and defecting to the Benedetti family. The Morettis said. Marco fled the city. Elena had never believed that story, but disbelief was not proof. Luca crouched across from her. For one moment, the ballroom disappeared, and they were 23 again in the back room of her father's tailor shop. Luca fastening a silver thimble to a chain around her neck because she kept losing hers. His eyes moved to that same thimble now, visible above the neckline of her dress. "My jacket never went to your father," he said. "Then, someone lied to you." His jaw tightened. 6 years earlier, on the morning after Marco vanished, Luca had found Elena's delivery van on a traffic camera near the river. She had refused to explain where she had gone. He had called her a traitor, and she had answered that his family deserved every secret it created. They had not spoken privately since. Vittorio lifted his hand. "We do not need a bedtime story. Her shop had access to the suit yesterday. Her father's stitching is inside it. She has hated this family for years. I hated what one man in this family did." Elena said, "I never knew which man." Several captains shifted. Luca rose and ordered his security chief, Paolo Greco, to place the jacket in a clear evidence sleeve. Vittorio objected immediately, insisting that tradition required Elena to be judged before midnight, when the council would vote on permanent control of the East Pier route. That detail changed the shape of the room. The vote was the reason every Allied captain had gathered beneath one roof. Vittorio had managed the pier since Marco vanished. At midnight, temporary authority would become his for life. Elena looked at the cut stitches again. Whoever exposed the old repair tonight had known exactly when the council would be least willing to delay. "I need my father's work ledger," she said. "He recorded every emergency repair by date, garment, and thread lot." "It's in my shop, convenient," Vittorio murmured. Luca studied her face. "Paolo will bring it. He wanted to find it. My father hid sensitive orders behind the west cutting cabinet, and the release catch is inside the base." Luca knew when she was afraid. She counted stitches with her thumb, touching each fingertip in sequence. He watched her do it now, then took the evidence sleeve from Paolo. "The guests remain here," Luca announced. "The vote is suspended until I return. Elena comes with me." Vittorio's calm finally cracked. "You cannot leave during an active attack. I can do anything required to learn who fired at me." Luca's eyes never left Elena. "Even trust the woman I once swore I never would again." Before they reached the ballroom doors, Paolo's radio hissed. Smoke had been reported on Mulberry Street. Elena's Tailor's shop was burning. Luca's armored sedan cut through the rain while two security vehicles cleared the streets ahead. Elena sat beside him in the rear seat, the sealed jacket across both their knees. She called her assistant Rosa 3 times. Each call went to voicemail. "The fire department is 6 minutes out," Paolo said from the front passenger seat. "Patrol unit says the front windows are intact. Smoke is coming from the rear." Rosa was closing alone, Elena said. "She keeps the back door bolted after dark." Luca reached for her phone before she could call again. "Save the battery." She pulled it away. "Do not manage me because you feel guilty." His expression barely changed, but his hand closed into a fist on his thigh. "You think this is guilt? I think you publicly accused me before you examined the jacket. A man shot at me in a suit only you touched yesterday, and your uncle knew about my father's stitching before I explained it." Luca's eyes sharpened in the ballroom. Vittorio had indeed said so. Her father's stitching was inside the jacket. Elena had mentioned the finish, but not yet confirmed who made it when he first demanded judgment. It was a small error from a man who rarely made them. Paolo turned slightly. He could have inferred it. "Perhaps," Luca said, though doubt had entered his voice. Elena looked through the wet glass at shuttered storefronts. 6 years ago, your brother came to our shop after midnight. He wore that jacket. There was blood on his shirt. The sedan seemed to contract around them." Luca spoke softly. "You told me you never saw him." "I lied." Paolo glanced at Luca, then raised the privacy partition without being asked. Elena forced herself to continue. "Marco had been shot through the upper arm. The bullet passed through him and the jacket. My father stopped the bleeding and repaired the coat because Marco said he needed to return it before anyone noticed. I drove him to the old freight station. He made me promise not to contact you until he knew who had betrayed him, and you kept that promise for 6 years. For one night the next morning, I went to your house. Vittorio met me at the gate. He already knew my van had been seen, he said. Marco had stolen from you, that helping him made my father and Rosa targets, and that you had ordered me turned away. I gave no such order. I know that now. I did not know it then. Luca leaned back, the old jacket between them like a body. On that morning, Vittorio had told him Elena refused to come inside and had left the city with Marco. Each lie had been built around a true piece. Her van, her silence, Marco as blood. Luca had chosen the version that preserved his faith in his family. Why did your father keep the ledger? He asked. Because he never destroyed honest work, even when honesty frightened him. They reached Mulberry Street at 9:24. Smoke poured from a broken vent above Russo tailoring, but there were no flames in the front showroom. Luca ordered 2 men to cover the alley and followed Elena toward the side entrance. You stay behind me, he said. The archive is behind a cabinet that weighs 400 pounds. Unless you know where the floor track releases, you will waste the next 30 minutes. Then stay close. Inside, smoke stung Elena's eyes. Sprinklers had soaked the racks, turning wool coats heavy and dark. A man in a firefighter S-jacket emerged from the rear hall, but his boots were clean despite the ash on the floor. Elena stopped Luca. The false firefighter drew a suppressed pistol. Luca drove Elena behind the counter as Polo fired from the doorway. Glass burst above them. Luca moved with controlled precision, keeping his injured ribs guarded, and forced the gunman back into the pressing room. Elena heard a muffled cry beneath the cutting table. Rosa lay bound behind stacked fabric rolls, conscious but bleeding from a cut at her temple. Elena crawled to her, using the small scissors from her sewing kit to cut the tape around Rosa's wrists. They wanted the old books, Rosa whispered. I told them you moved everything to storage. Good girl. Another shot struck the counter. Luca's men pinned the intruder in the rear hall. But smoke thickened rapidly. The fire had been set inside the wall cavity where the sprinklers could not reach it. Elena guided Rosa toward the front. Then she saw the west cutting cabinet standing 6 inches away from the wall. Someone had found the archive. She turned back. Luca caught her wrist. No, if the ledger burns, Vittorio gets his vote and I get his sentence. I will not trade you for paper. Then help me move the cabinet. Together they crossed the smoke-filled room. Elena kicked the hidden release beneath the base. The cabinet rolled along its floor track, revealing a narrow steel door. It stood open. Most of the ledgers were gone. On the empty shelf lay a single torn carbon page and a black chestnut wet with fresh blood. Luca picked up the knight. Marco had carried the matching piece in his pocket since childhood. From somewhere beyond the rear exit, a man's voice called through the smoke. You always were late, little brother. Luca moved toward the voice before Paolo could stop him. Elena caught the back of his shirt, not from strength but surprise, and the half-second of resistance saved him. A burst of gunfire crossed the rear doorway at chest height. Luca pulled Elena down as Paolo returned fire. The voice had been a recording. A small speaker lay in the alley beneath the rain. Wired to a motion sensor, the gunman escaped over the neighboring roof, while Luca's men carried Rosa outside. Firefighters arrived moments later and tore open the burning wall. At 9:41, Elena stood beneath a pharmacy awning across the street, wrapped in a gray emergency blanket. Rain had loosened her chestnut hair from its high twist, and soot marked one cheek. Rosa sat in an ambulance with 3 stitches above her eyebrow. The injury was painful but not dangerous. Elena stayed until the paramedic promised Rosa would be taken to St. Vincent S. and kept under Morty protection. Luca waited without rushing her. The bruise beneath his ribs had darkened, and a shallow cut crossed the back of his tattooed right hand. When Elena finally faced him, he held the torn carbon page inside a dry plastic sleeve. The page recorded an emergency repair at 1:18 a.m. on October 17, 6 years earlier. Black dinner jacket. Right upper arm puncture. Inner canvas replacement. Customer initials MM. The signature line had been ripped away. Her father Est's notes remained in the margin. Driver waiting. Gray Packard, silver heron pin. Vittorio's driver wore a heron pin, Luca said. All his personal staff did then. That connects his household to the repair. It does not prove he ordered the shooting. You are defending him. I am refusing to make the mistake you made with me. The words landed. Luca looked at the burning shop and then at Rosa's ambulance. My accusation put a target on you. The target existed before tonight. You only told the shooter where I would be. Paolo reported that the false firefighter had carried no identification. His radio was tuned to a private channel, and the blood on the chess piece did not belong to the attacker. It had been applied deliberately. Someone wanted Luca to believe Marco had been present. Elena examined the page more closely beneath the ambulance light. Her father wrote thread lots as 3 numbers, but beside this repair he had drawn 4 tiny diagonal marks. To anyone else they looked like a pen test. Elena recognized them as Tailor's chalk notation for directional nap, the way velvet fibers lie when brushed. This is about fabric, she said. My father used marks like these when he couldn't safely write a name. 4 strokes meant the 4th bolt on a shelf. Which shelf? The old stockroom we rented on Canal Street. He closed it after Marco disappeared. Luca ordered Polo to send a team. Elena objected. If Vittorio knows about the ledger, he may know the stockroom too. A convoy will warn whoever is watching, and going alone will get you killed. I did not say alone. At 10:05, while Paolo took Rosa to the hospital and coordinated security, Luca and Elena left in an unmarked sedan driven by Luca's cousin Nico. Elena had changed into dry black trousers, a cream blouse, and her shop coat salvaged from the front rack. The silver thimble remained at her throat. Luca wore a spare charcoal overcoat over his white shirt. The jacket stayed sealed in a locked case at Pul's temporary command post. The Canal Street building was a narrow brick warehouse between a closed print shop and a wholesale grocer. Elena unlocked the side door with a key she had not used in years. Dust and cedar filled the stockroom. Wooden racks held bolts of fabric her father had refused to sell because each carried a memory of some vanished customer. The 4th bolt was dark blue velvet. Elena lifted it down and found a cavity cut into the cardboard core. Inside was half of an old doc account book and a cassette tape wrapped in oilcloth. Luca stared at the first page. Payments assigned to Marco's initials continued for 11 months after Marco disappeared. Each transfer ended in an account controlled by a shell importer at East Pier. Vittorio had used the missing man's name to steal from the family while making the theft appear to be ongoing treason. This is why Marco ran, Elena said, or why someone wanted him to. Luca turned to the final page. A handwritten line read, If LM asks, play the tape only where there are no Moretti walls. Nico brought an old cassette player from the sedan's emergency kit. Elena checked the tape housing before inserting it. Her father's voice emerged beneath a wash of static. Samuel described Marco arriving wounded, the jacket repair, and a gray Packard waiting across the street. Then Marco spoke. His breathing was ragged, but his words were clear. Luca, if this reaches you, your private telephone is compromised. Do not tell Uncle Vittorio where you are going. I have proof he sold East Pier access to the Vescari crew. Elena saved my life. Believe her before you believe me. The tape clicked off. Luca stood motionless. He had spent 6 years believing Elena chose Marco over him. Marco's final recorded request had been that Luca trust her. Headlights swept across the dusty window. 3 cars stopped outside, blocking both ends of the street. Nico killed the stockroom lights. Luca drew the pistol concealed beneath his coat and moved Elena behind a rack of heavy wool. The street outside went dark except for rain shining on the hoods of the 3 cars. Rear exit, he whispered, nailed shut after a break-in. Windows painted shut. Your father built a very secure trap. Despite everything, Elena almost smiled. Luca heard it in her breath. Years earlier, whenever a customer became impossible, they had hidden together among these same fabric racks until Samuel Russo chased them back to work. At 10:24, the front lock snapped. 2 men entered with weapons raised. Luca fired once, forcing them behind the counter, while Nico overturned a cutting table for cover. A 3rd man moved along the side alley toward the stockroom door. Elena pulled Luca toward the blue velvet rack. There's a delivery hatch beneath it. You said no rear exit. It is not an exit. It is a fabric chute. She released 2 rusted latches. A square door opened at floor level, revealing a steep wooden chute that ended in the neighboring grocer's basement. Luca handed the ledger and tape to her, then sent her through first. The narrow passage bruised Elena's shoulder and caught her coat, but she kept the evidence clamped to her chest. Nico followed. Luca fired twice more before dropping into the chute and pulling the hatch closed above him. They landed among empty produce crates. The basement door at the far end opened before Luca could aim. A tall man with Luca's eyes stepped into the weak light. Marco Moretti was leaner than he had been 6 years earlier. A scar pulled across his right upper arm where the bullet had passed through him. His beard was rough, and rain darkened the collar of his brown field coat. He held a black chess king in one hand and a pistol in the other. The night was dramatic, Elena said, struggling to catch her breath. It made him leave the hotel. Marco looked at Luca. I needed to know whether he would follow evidence or Uncle Vittorio's orders. Luca's pistol did not lower. You set the fire? No, I placed the speaker after I saw Vittorio's men enter. I tried to draw them into the alley. Rosa was hurt. Pain crossed Marco's face. That was not part of my plan. Outside, gunfire broke from both ends of Canal Street. The men from the 3rd car were Marcos and had engaged the attackers. The distinction brought no comfort. Marco had used Elena's burning shop as a test, gambling with lives while claiming he had come to expose the man who did the same. Who is on the tape? He asked. You are, Luca said, telling me to trust Elena. Marco finally lowered his weapon. For once I gave good advice. The brothers stared at each other across 6 years of silence. Luca wanted to cross the space. Elena could see it, but anger held him where love might have moved him. Marco explained as they passed through the grocer's loading tunnel to an armored van waiting 1 block east. After Elena left him at the freight station, He had met a captain who promised safe passage. The captain delivered him to Vescari gunmen instead. Marco escaped before dawn, but by then Vittorio had circulated accounts showing that Marco had stolen from his own family. Luca's private telephone carried a listening device. Every attempt Marco made to approach a loyal Moretti contact ended with that person threatened or dead. "So you disappeared," Luca said once the van began moving. "I survived. There is a difference." Marco spent 3 years inside the Vescari organization under an assumed name, tracing the route Vittorio had sold. By the time he obtained the other half of the account book, Vittorio controlled the captains who would judge him. Returning without proof would have triggered a war and placed Luca in the middle. Elena examined Marco's half of the ledger. The paper edges matched hers. Together, the pages showed Vittorio routing Moretti weapons and protection payments through a Vescari importer, then assigning the losses to Marco after his disappearance. The final entry authorized a permanent transfer at midnight that night. "Why tonight?" she asked. "Because once the council gives him East Pier for life, he can erase the temporary accounts and kill every Vescari witness who helped him." Marco looked at Luca. "Including me." The van turned south toward a safe garage. Luca reached for the ledger, but Marco held it back. "At 11:30, you will sign East Pier over to me," Marco said. "I will stop the Vescari crews from attacking the hotel. Refuse, and the council will learn its new Don spent 6 years protecting the uncle who shot his own brother." Luca's face became unreadable. "You did not return for justice. Justice is what men call power when they finally possess it." Elena looked from one brother to the other. Vittorio had not merely hidden a crime. He had allowed resentment to mature until either Moretti brother could be used to destroy the other. Then Marco's driver touched his earpiece and went pale. The Vescari crews were already moving toward the hotel, and none of them were obeying Marco. The armored van entered a private garage beneath a closed appliance store at 10:39. Marco's men lowered a steel shutter behind it. A bare office above the bays contained a table, 6 chairs, a medical cabinet, and no Moretti walls. Elena cleaned the cut on Luca's hand, while the brothers argued over maps of East Pier. She wound gauze between his tattooed fingers with the same firm economy she used to shape a sleeve. "You still pull the bandage too tight," Luca said. "You still complain when someone prevents you from bleeding on expensive fabric." Their eyes met. The intimacy of the exchange silenced the room more effectively than a threat. Marco turned away first. Luca asked why Marco had placed the old chess piece at the shop. Marco said it was the only signal Luca would recognize without Vittorio understanding its meaning. As boys, they had used the Black Knight to mark a false move during games with their uncle. Marco had expected Luca to see that the shop attack was a diversion. "I saw blood," Luca said, "not a lesson." "That is why Vittorio has always been able to lead you by the throat." Luca crossed the room in 2 steps, but Elena stood between them. She did not pretend she could stop either man physically. She simply held the joined account book where both could see it. "If you fight now, Vittorio reaches midnight," she said. "That is the only result he needs." Marco's second-in-command confirmed the Vescari crews had received orders from someone using Marco's private authorization phrase. They were told the Moretti Council planned to execute Marco publicly, and they were to attack at 11:15. The phrase had been used only once before, during a warehouse evacuation 3 months earlier. "Who heard it?" Luca asked. 4 men. 2 are in this room. Marco's gaze moved to his driver, Thomas, who immediately placed his weapon on the table. The other two were outside the city. Elena looked at the ledger instead of the men. Her father had taught her that alteration revealed themselves through tension. The place pulling hardest was not always where the damage began. Vittorio does not need Marco's real phrase, she said. He only needs the crews to believe it came from Marco. Who authenticates the message? Thomas answered, the harbor dispatcher repeats the last 4 digits of the route assignment. The account book listed those same 4 digits beside every illegal shipment. Vittorio had created the routes and therefore possessed the authentication sequence. He could send a convincing order without compromising Marco's inner circle. Marco swore under his breath he had built his return around records that still gave Vittorio control. The first plan was to call off the crews directly, but the harbor repeater had gone dead. Sending men to every unit would take longer than the 36 minutes remaining before the attack. Luca proposed evacuating the hotel. Marco warned that panicked captains would interpret evacuation as surrender and vote for Vittorio elsewhere. Elena spread several sheets of brown pattern paper across the table. She placed the torn carbon page beneath the account ledger and rubbed the side of a Tailor pencil lightly over the surface. Indentations appeared from pages that had once rested above it, partial route numbers and a repeated phrase, North Loom. My father wrote on this pad after Marco left, she said. He pressed hard when he was angry. North Loom was a Moretti textile mill near East Pier. It closed before I was born. Marco leaned over the paper. Vittorio used its basement as a transfer point. I thought it was abandoned after the shooting. The shooting happened there? Luca asked. Marco nodded. He had confronted Vittorio in the mill office. Luca's jacket was in Marco's car because he had borrowed it for a truce dinner. Vittorio fired when Marco refused to sign away the route. Marco escaped through the dye room and reached the Russo shop. The old repair, the account book, and Marco's scar now formed a coherent chain. But only the council could strip Vittorio of authority before midnight. They needed the physical jacket, and it remained with Paolo at the hotel command post. Elena tore the shaded pattern paper into 3 sections. She gave one to Luca, one to Marco, and folded the third into a narrow strip. With a few quick stitches, she hid it inside the hem of her shop coat. Why divide it? Luca asked. Because every person who kept the whole truth has been attacked. Marco arranged for his loyal crews to converge on North Loom instead of the hotel, using runners rather than the compromised radio network. Luca called Paolo on a secure satellite handset. Paolo confirmed. The jacket was still locked in the hotel's steel evidence case, and that Vittorio had not left the ballroom. They would enter through the hotel's underground delivery bay at 11:05, reunite the evidence, and force a council hearing before the attack. As Marco's men prepared the vehicles, Luca drew Elena into the empty stairwell. Rainwater ticked through a drainpipe beside them. I should have opened the door when you came. 6 years ago, he said. You should have come to the door yourself. I believed the man who raised me, and I believed the man who threatened my father. Neither belief absolves us. Luca touched the silver thimble at her throat, but stopped before his fingers reached her skin. Is there anything left between us that is not evidence? Elena's breath caught. Ask me after you choose what kind of man walks into that ballroom. Below them, the steel garage shutter began to rise without authorization. The lights went out at 10:56. The rising shutter framed 6 armed men in the rain, all wearing Moretti security jackets. For one dangerous second, Luca's people assumed they were Paulo's reinforcements. Elena noticed the sleeves. Moretti guards wore jackets tailored to conceal shoulder holsters, with a deeper right arm sky and an extra fold of cloth behind the elbow. These uniforms pulled evenly across both shoulders. They were counterfeit, she shouted. Gunfire swept the office windows. Luca dragged her behind the stairwell wall, while Marco's men returned fire from the bays. The false guards drove a delivery truck halfway through the opening, preventing the shutter from closing. Smoke canisters rolled beneath the vehicles. Luca tried to keep Elena behind him, but she pointed toward a row of hanging work covers near the maintenance cage. "Those are fire blankets. Get them wet." They covered their faces and moved through the thickening smoke. Marco reached the side door with the account book inside his coat. Thomas fell beside the van with a bullet in his thigh, alive but unable to stand. Marco turned back for him, and that choice cost him the exit. 2 attackers struck from the maintenance cage and forced him to the floor. Elena saw one of them take the ledger. She also saw the embroidered heron inside his cuff. Vittorio's personal staff had never stopped wearing the old insignia. They had simply moved it where allies would not see. Luca fired toward the cage, but an attacker slammed a metal gate between them. Marco was dragged through a service tunnel. Elena ran for the manual release and slipped on water mixed with oil. Her left ankle folded beneath her. Pain flashed to her knee, sharp enough to blur her vision. Luca caught her before she hit the floor. "Can you stand?" "Yes." She tried and nearly collapsed. "Not well." Nico reached the truck's cab and pulled the driver out. With the vehicle moved, the shutter came down, trapping 3 attackers inside. The others escaped through the tunnel with Marco and the account book. The entire assault lasted 90 seconds. At 11:01, the emergency lights returned. Thomas pressed a bandage to his thigh while Lucas medic examined Elena. The ankle was badly sprained, not broken, but she could not put full weight on it. Luca knelt to wrap it, his movements controlled despite the fury in his eyes. "The delivery bay was my plan," Elena said. "I said we could enter the hotel unseen. They attacked here, not there. Because I assumed the words. Northloom identified a location. They may have identified an operation. Vittorio knew we would trace it. You made a reasonable inference. A wrong one. Marco is paying for it." Luca tightened the bandage and looked up at her. "Then we correct it. We do not turn it into a weapon against ourselves." The captured attackers carried burner phones with no saved messages. One had a hotel access badge issued that afternoon by Vittorio's office. Another carried a folded strip of black silk marked with white chalk, a crude drawing of a loom and the number 12. Nico assumed it meant midnight at the mill. Elena rubbed the fabric between her fingers. The chalk had a waxy texture and faint metallic grit. "This is not Tailor's chalk," she said. "It is industrial marking stone used on steel cable, and the silk is stage drapery, flame-resistant, the kind installed above hotel ballrooms." Northloom was not directing them to the abandoned mill. It was naming the Hotel Else North rigging loom, the motor system controlling the curtains, chandeliers, and acoustic panels above the council ballroom. Vittorio had used the mill phrase to send them away, while his people prepared something over the heads of 200 trapped guests. Luca called Paolo. No answer. He called the ballroom's internal line. Vittorio answered. "Your brother is with me," the older man said, behind his voice. Luca heard the machinery of the hotel rigging system. Bring Elena and the torn page to the north catwalk by 11:30. Come without your soldiers or Marco falls before the council exactly as he should have. 6 years ago. The line went dead. Elena cut open the hem of her coat and removed her third of the shaded pattern paper. The account book was gone. The cassette had been crushed beneath the attacker's truck, and the original carbon page remained in Luca's inner pocket. Vittorio believed he had taken the only complete record. He did not know the pressure marks had been copied. Luca helped Elena. Stand, you are going to the hospital. No, you cannot run. I do not need to run. I need to reach a sewing machine. Nico drove while Luca sat beside Elena in the rear seat. One arm braced around her whenever the sedan turned. The hotel was 9 blocks away. Rain slowed traffic, but Moretti vehicles blocked intersections and cleared a path. They reached the underground delivery ramp at 11:11. The bay appeared deserted. Luca's men entered first and found Paolo behind a linen cart, conscious with a gunshot crease along his scalp. He had recognized Vittorio's false guards when they came for the evidence case and moved the jacket before they struck him. Laundry rail 7, he told Elena, blue garment bag. Luca ordered a medic to stay with Paolo, then carried Elena to the hotel wardrobe room despite her protests. His bruised ribs made the effort painful, but his face revealed only a tightening around the eyes. He set her in a wheeled work chair beside an industrial sewing machine. Rail 7 held 30 identical garment bags. Elena found the right one by touch. The jacket inside was still sealed, and the old repaired panel remained beneath the torn lining. Vittorio expects us to bring this, Luca said. Then, we will. Elena cut the evidence seal in front of Paolo's body camera, so custody remained documented. She removed the jacket's inner canvas as a single palm-sized panel, preserving the old bullet hole, brown stain, repair thread, and Samuel Russo's distinctive finish. Then she cut a matching piece from a hotel uniform jacket and basted it beneath the lining. Under dim light, the substitution would survive a hurried inspection. The original panel went inside a new oilcloth pouch with the carbon ledger page. Elena stitched the pouch into the lower back of her cream blouse, beneath the waistband of her trousers, where a search focused on pockets would miss it. She gave the copied pattern paper sections to Paolo and Nico and instructed them to approach the council separately. If one of us is stopped, the others keep moving, she said. The rubbing is not proof by itself, Paolo warned. No, but it tells the council which entries to demand from the book Vittorio stole. If he refuses to produce it, his refusal matters. If he produces it, the page pressure and torn edges authenticate our carbon. Luca watched her reclose the jacket lining. You have done this before. I have hidden emergency money in hems for women leaving dangerous husbands. People search pockets. They rarely search construction. She finished at 11:19. Luca helped her into the work chair again, but Elena refused to be rolled onto the catwalk like cargo. She accepted a black walking cane from the costume department and practiced once. Her left ankle throbbed, yet the cane allowed her to move without placing full weight on it. Nico discovered that the North Service elevator had been disabled. The only route to the rigging level was a narrow stairwell from the mezzanine. Luca wanted to leave Elena behind. She reminded him that Vittorio had demanded her presence and would kill Marco if she failed to appear. Then I carry you up, Luca said, and arrive unable to breathe because of your ribs? No, they climbed slowly. Luca kept one hand near her elbow without touching. unless she faltered. The stairwell smelled of hot cable and stage dust. Above them, motors started and stopped in short tests. At the 8th landing, Elena paused. A length of black silk trailed beneath the fire door. She compared it with the strip taken from the attacker. Same weave, same flame-resistant coating. White marks crossed it at regular intervals. "He has wrapped the south counterweight cable," she said. "The chalk marks are measurements." Luca examined the heavy line disappearing through a pulley. For what? To make a cut cable look intact from below. When the motor takes the load, the silk separates and the weight falls. The south counterweight balanced the acoustic canopy above the council table. If it dropped, the canopy would swing into the ballroom and crush everyone seated beneath it. Vittorio's midnight contingency was already in place. Elena took a spool of bright red upholstery thread from her sewing kit and tied 3 short markers around the unaltered side of the cable. Paolo's engineers need to secure this point, this break, and the opposite line together. If they pull only one, the canopy twists. Luca photographed the markers and sent the image to Paolo with no explanatory text that could be intercepted. Paolo had overseen hotel construction and would recognize the mechanism. At 11:25, Luca opened the catwalk door. Marco knelt on the grated platform 30 feet above the ballroom, wrists bound behind him. Vittorio stood beside the north control console with 4 gunmen and the stolen account book tucked beneath one arm, through gaps in the acoustic panels. The trapped guests were visible below. The council captains sat at the central table, unaware that the canopy above them had been sabotaged. Vittorio looked at Elena's cane and smiled without warmth. Samuel Russo's daughter always did arrive with the proper tools. Luca held up the jacket. "Release Marco. Bring me the coat and the carbon page. You can have one when my brother crosses the catwalk." Vittorio opened the account book to a page marked with Marco's signature. "Your brother sold East Pier willingly. Elena has not told you everything." Marco looked at her, startled. For the first time that night, Elena saw uncertainty in his face. Vittorio read the entry aloud. 3 days after the shooting, Marco Moretti had authorized a transfer of East Pier access to a Vescari intermediary. The signature was unmistakable. Marco did not deny it. "They had Elena's father," he said. Vittorio offered a trade. "I signed one temporary route release and Samuel walked free." Elena's grip tightened on the cane. Her father had never told her he had been held. He had carried the secret to his grave, and Marco had carried the guilt into exile. "The authorization in that book is permanent," Luca said. Then it was altered. Marco turned toward Vittorio. "I gave them 72 hours, nothing more." Vittorio shrugged. 6 years of resentment. And you never considered that your heroic brother had signed the family away. The revelation was designed to divide them at the exact moment cooperation mattered. Luca looked at Marco, then at Elena. 6 years earlier, he would have chosen the cleanest betrayal because uncertainty frightened him more than anger. Now he asked, "Can the entry have been changed?" Elena answered carefully. "The paper will tell us if I can examine it." Vittorio gestured to one of his men. "Take the jacket." The gunman crossed the platform. Luca surrendered the blue garment bag, but kept himself between the weapon and Elena. The man searched the jacket, found the substituted inner panel, and passed it to Vittorio. In the poor catwalk light, the old silk and Elena's fresh basting appeared convincing. "The carbon page?" Vittorio asked. Elena removed the empty silver thimble from her necklace and held it up. "Release Marco first. Vittorio believed the folded page was hidden inside it. He ordered one gunman to cut Marco's wrist ties, but kept a pistol pressed beneath Marco's jaw. Marco rose stiffly. Below, the ballroom clock showed 11:29. Luca tossed the thimble across the gap. It struck the grating and rolled beneath the control console. Two men looked down. Marco drove his shoulder into the gunman behind him. Luca crossed the platform before Vittorio could fire, knocking the weapon aside. The shot tore through the catwalk rail. Elena dropped behind a steel support as the other guards opened fire. She could not run on the injured ankle, and the cane offered no protection. The north control console stood 4 feet away. She pulled the compact seam ripper from her sewing kit and cut through the silk, wrapping around a bundle of labeled control wires. The colors beneath matched the red markers she had tied downstairs. She did not cut the wires. She separated them enough to find the manual brake lead and pulled its mechanical release pin. An alarm sounded. Steel clamps locked across both counterweight drums, freezing the canopy before Vittorio's remote command could drop it. One of the gunmen lunged toward her. Elena swung the heavy cane into his knee, but the movement threw her off balance. She fell against the console, pain shooting through her ankle. The man raised his pistol. Marco struck him from the side. The weapon slid through the grating and landed on an empty banquet table below. Screams rose from the ballroom. Luca and Vittorio fought beside the rail. Luca's bruised ribs limited his right side, and Vittorio exploited it, driving an elbow beneath his arm. Marco joined him, and for the first time in 6 years, the brothers moved with the instinctive coordination they had learned as boys. They forced Vittorio back, but he slashed Luca's shoulder with a concealed blade and escaped through the east catwalk door. His remaining guard grabbed the decoy jacket and ignited it with a maintenance flare. Fire climbed the midnight wool. Vittorio watched from the doorway long enough to see the repaired panel curl into black ash. "Now you have a story and no proof," he said before locking the door from the outside. Smoke gathered beneath the rigging roof. The catwalk's east and west doors were sealed. Paulo's engineers worked below to secure the canopy, but the alarm had triggered a fire barrier that isolated the upper level. Elena crawled to the control console and examined the stage drapery cables. Hotel curtains were sewn in vertical widths, each finished with a weighted hem and attached to a traveler track. During repairs, workers lowered them through a service slot behind the orchestra shell. "We can descend behind the west curtain," she said. Marco looked over the edge. "That is 30 feet. The fabric will not hold 3 people climbing at once. But the maintenance cradle attached to its hem. Will she used her seam ripper to expose the webbing loops without cutting them, then guided Luca as he released the traveler brake. The narrow maintenance cradle rose from behind the shell. Marco lowered Elena into it, first because of her ankle. Luca followed. Then, Marco. The motor groaned under the combined weight but held long enough to bring them to the mezzanine. At 11:38, they entered the ballroom through the west curtain. Guests backed away in alarm. Luca's white shirt was streaked with blood from the cut on his shoulder. Marco stood beside him alive. Elena leaned on her cane, soot and rain, marking her clothes at the council table. Vittorio had already opened the stolen account book and called the suspended vote back to order. He held up Marco's signed page. "Before you stands the traitor who sold East Pier and the woman who forged evidence to protect him." Every captain in the room turned toward Elena. Elena crossed the ballroom slowly, the cane striking marble between each step. Vittorio's gaze followed her with growing irritation. He had expected a frightened tradeswoman carrying a ruined story. Instead, she stopped at the council table and asked to examine the account book. "She is not a council member," Vittorio said. Luca stood beside her, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. "She is the only person here who can explain how the evidence was altered. Let her work." 3 captains demanded the inspection. Vittorio could refuse Luca, but refusing them would expose fear. He slid the book across the table. Elena opened it to Marco's signed authorization. The page lay flatter than the surrounding leaves. Along the binding, 5 stitches were black, while the original thread had faded brown. Someone had removed the folio and sewn in a replacement. She placed a blank sheet over the following page and rubbed Tailor's chalk lightly across it. Indented words emerged. 72 hours. Emergency passage. Samuel Russo released. Marco's original pen had pressed through to the sheet beneath. The permanent authorization now visible above had been written later on substituted paper. Vittorio reached for the book. Elena closed it first. "My father taught me that a repaired seam is strongest when the person wearing it knows where it was torn," she said. "You hid the repair and built 6 years of power on everyone mistaking it for original cloth." She cut the stitches inside her blouse and removed the oilcloth pouch. Paulo's body camera footage had preserved every step of the evidence transfer. Inside lay Samuel's carbon order page and the original panel from Luca's jacket, still holding the old bullet damage and dried stain. Marco rolled up his sleeve, showing the scar aligned with the torn canvas. Nico entered through the side aisle with his section of the pattern. Rubbing Polo, his head bandaged, arrived through the opposite doors with the other. The 3 sections reproduced route entries that matched Vittorio's stolen book. No single person had carried enough to destroy or forge the whole record. The ballroom clock showed 11:47. Vittorio pressed a remote control in his pocket. Above the council table, motors strained, but the brakes Elena had locked held the sabotaged canopy in place. Paulo's engineers pulled back the north curtain, exposing the wrapped cable and red thread markers to the room. One of Vittorio's guards drew a weapon. Luca saw the silver heron inside the man's cuff and fired before he could aim at Elena. The guard fell wounded. Marco's people entered the ballroom without firing and announced that the Vescari crews had stood down after seeing Marco alive. The captains rose one by one. They did not vote to give Vittorio East Pier. They voted to strip him of his office pending a blood council at dawn. Vittorio seized the wounded guard's pistol and aimed at Marco. Luca stepped between them. The shot struck Luca's armored undershirt and drove him backward. But Marco caught him before he fell. Luca fired once from the floor. Vittorio's weapon spun away, and a bullet shattered his right knee. No one rushed to help the former consigliere. At 11:55, Paula's men bound Vittorio and carried him from the ballroom. Luca refused the chair offered to him. He remained standing until the clock passed midnight and the East Pier transfer expired unsigned. Only then did he turn to Elena. "You asked what kind of man would walk into this room," he said quietly. Elena looked at Marco supporting one side of him and at the captains forced to face what loyalty without scrutiny had cost them. "I saw him," she replied. "Now I need to learn who walks out." By 1:30 Sunday morning, the guests had gone and the Moretti Grand Hotel had become a maze of medics, engineers, and exhausted guards. Luca's shoulder required 12 stitches. The second bullet had left another deep bruise across his chest, but had not penetrated the armor. Elena's ankle was placed in a rigid brace, and the doctor ordered her to keep weight off it for several days. Rosa called from St. Vincent S. and demanded to know whether the shop still had a roof. Elena laughed for the first time that night. The front showroom had survived, though the pressing room and archive wall would need rebuilding. Rosa promised to return to work as soon as someone replaced the espresso machine. Marco waited outside Luca's medical suite. He no longer demanded East Pier at dawn. He would testify before the Blood Council and surrender the Vescari route records in exchange for protection for the crews who had followed him. He and Luca had not forgiven each other. They had agreed to begin with the truth, which was harder and more useful. Luca made the cost of his own failure public within the family. He surrendered direct control of East Pier to 3 rotating captains for 1 year and required every route order to carry 2 independent seals. The decision weakened his personal authority, but it prevented another uncle, brother, or Don from owning the silence around the docks. Before sunrise, Luca drove Elena to Mulberry Street himself. Nico carried her through the damaged doorway only after she refused Luca's offer, with enough force to make his stitched shoulder ache. Inside, wet fabric hung from racks like tired flags. The cutting table was scarred, the west cabinet blackened, and her father's old chair remained untouched beneath a sheet of soot. Elena sat in it and placed the recovered jacket panel in a cedar box. It would stay with the council until Vittorio's judgment, then return to the Russo archive with copies of every custody record. Honest work, even frightening work, would not be destroyed. Luca stood before the long mirror in his torn white shirt. Without the jacket, the tattoos across his neck and upper chest were fully visible. For once, he had no armor that looked like elegance. "I cannot restore 6 years," he said. "No, I cannot ask you to enter my house and call that safety. No." He accepted each answer without bargaining. "But I can come here when invited. I can tell you the truth before it becomes convenient, and if you ask me to leave, I will leave." Elena opened the drawer where she kept measuring. "Tapes take off the ruined shirt." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "You need a new jacket," she said. The last one carried too many other men's decisions. Luca removed the shirt carefully because of his stitches. Elena looped a tape around his shoulders, then measured his chest and injured side. Their closeness no longer belonged to memory alone. It was uncertain, restrained, and freely chosen. When she finished, Luca touched the silver thimble at her throat. This time, Elena did not move away. "One dinner," she said, "after my shop is repaired, somewhere without guards at the next table. I know a place if you say the Morte Grand. I will stab you with a pin." The corner of his mouth almost softened, though his face remained controlled. A family restaurant in Queens. No council table. Outside, the rain had stopped. Morning light entered through the cracked front window and settled across the ruined shop, revealing damage that could be measured, cut away, and rebuilt. Elena rested her palm over the new numbers in her notebook. Luca waited for her to decide when he could return.